Hi, it's Obi-Wan, and this is Red Chair Reading. We are reading The Ghost at Skeleton Rock, Chapter 4. This one's about 5 pages long. Really 10 pages, right? 5 flipped pages. Okay, Chapter 4, Ghost at Skeleton Rock. A double burglary. The armed intruders kept the boys and Mr. Bivin covered as they backed hastily toward the door with the Hugo dummy. "Don't try any hero stuff and don't call the cops after we leave," warned the swarthy gunman. "If you do, you'll sure regret it." Then the tall man jerked open the door and the two dashed out to a car parked at the curb. Frank and Joe rushed to the window just in time to see the short man slide behind the wheel. "Watch it, fellows," Chet begged. Pale and trembling with excitement, he half expected to see the store's show window shattered by a hail of bullets. Instead, the engine roared and the car, a green sedan, sped away. "No luck on the license number," Joe groaned. The rear plate was caked with mud. "After them," Frank cried, dashing out the door. The Hardys leaped into their convertible and took off. Luckily, traffic was light. In the distance, Joe caught a glimpse of the getaway car. "There it is," he yelled. Frank speeded up. The green car whined in a turn to the right at the next intersection. As the convertible followed, the other car suddenly put on a fresh burst of speed. "They must have spotted us in the rearview mirror," Frank muttered through clenched teeth. As the chase continued, the green car shot through a stop sign. When the boys reached the crossing, a stream of traffic barred the way. Then a huge tank truck halted for a left turn, completely blocking the intersection. By the time the route was clear, the getaway car was nowhere in sight. "What luck," groaned Joe. The boys cruised around for a while, hoping to locate the trail again, but finally gave up. "Guess we may as well go back and get Chet," Frank sighed. A police squad car was parked in front of the novelty shop. When the Hardys walked in, Mr. Bivin was relating the details of the holdup to the officers. "These are the boys," he said, nodding at Frank and Joe. "Any luck tracing the thieves?" one of the officers asked. Frank shook his head glumly. "We couldn't even get their license number." He gave a detailed description of the green sedan and also reported the general route which the thieves had taken. "I'll put it on the radio right away," said the other policeman. "There's still a chance we can stop them before they get out of town." He hurried outside to the squad car. The other officer took down the names and addresses of everyone involved, then left the shop. "Too bad, Chet," Joe sympathized. "Looks as if you're out of luck for a dummy today." "You're telling me," the young ventriloquist answered gloomily. "Don't be too sure of that," put in Mr. Bivin with a grin. "Huh?" Chet's eyes popped. "What do you mean?" "I mean there might just be another Hugo back in the storeroom. Dummies have been selling quickly, but while I was talking to those officers, I suddenly remembered tucking another box up on the top shelf. But don't get your hopes too high till I make sure." Chet waited in eager suspense. A few moments later, Mr. Bivin reappeared, beaming triumphantly. "Yes, got one right here. Hot ziggity!" Chet pounced on the box in delight, ripping off the cover. As he pulled out the dummy, both Frank and Joe gave a yelp of excitement. "This one wore a purple turban!" "My stars!" Mr. Bivin chuckled. "Seems like you two are just as het up as your friend here about finding this extra Hugo. But I reckon that's only natural, seeing as how you took your lives in your hands trying to save the other one." Frank and Joe merely smiled and made no effort to explain their jubilation. But the same thought was passing through both their minds. Could this be the Hugo purple turban referred to in their father's message? And had the two men made off with the wrong dummy? Meanwhile, Chet was putting the new Hugo through its paces. "Boy, this is for me," he gloated. "I'll work with it at home this evening." As the proprietor wrote out the sales check, Joe examined the dummy but could not find anything unusual about it. Frank again glanced at the instruction sheet. This one also printed in the same 3 languages. Suddenly, Frank's eyes narrowed. "That's funny," he muttered under his breath. "What's funny?" Joe asked. "These directions, the ones in French and English, are the same as those which came with the other dummy, but the directions in Spanish are different." Both boys could read French and Spanish. "You sure?" Joe asked. "Positive." After Mr. Bivin finished writing out the sales check and tore off a copy for Chet, Frank asked the man, "Does the other store in Bayport sell the Hugo dummies?" You'd like one too, eh?" The proprietor smiled. "Well, now, let me think." He paused and scratched his chin. "Might try Hanades over on Bay Street." "Hanades?" "That's right, nice elderly Japanese runs a puppet repair shop, and handles all kinds of interesting doodads. The Hardys thanked him and left the store with Chet. Outside, their stout pal asked Frank why he was so interested in finding another dealer. "Don't tell me you're going to take up ventriloquism too," he teased. "Not a chance," Frank replied, and explained about the curious difference in the instructions. He added, "It might be a fluke or it might mean something. Anyhow, I'd like to check another set of instructions." Hanade's puppet repair shop did indeed carry all kinds of doodads. The tiny store was crammed with oriental trinkets, samurai swords, brass Buddhas, dolls, heads hanging on the wall, birds and bird cages, aquariums with darting tropical fish, and numerous other items. Mr. Hanade was a small, bespectacled, pleasant gentleman. "Ah, yes," he replied to Frank's question. "I carry the Hugo puppets, made by a very fine company. Every puppet carefully inspected by owner before he sends it out." "What kind do you wish to see?" "The model with a turban, like this one that my friend has," replied Joe as Chet displayed his Hugo. "You wait, please. I check." Mr. Hanade returned shortly with a box containing a Hugo similar to Chet's, but it wore a green turban. Ignoring the dummy, Frank took out the instruction sheet and compared it with the one in Chet's box. "You're right," Joe muttered, reading over Frank's shoulder. "The Spanish wording is a little different." Frank asked if he might borrow Mr. Hanade's sheet of instructions overnight and offered to leave $1 on deposit. Though puzzled, the man agreed politely. "You take, please. No deposit necessary." "Thank you," said Chet, and the boys left the shop. Before dropping Chet at the farm, Joe said impulsively, "Say, fellows, do you think Professor Fox could be mixed up in anything shady?" Chet declared that the TV performer had a fine reputation, and he was sure that the man was above suspicion. Frank agreed with this. That evening, after supper, Frank and Joe huddled around the study lamp in their room, with the two sets of instructions in front of them. They were identical in every way, except for the change in the Spanish wording. "What do you make of it?" Joe asked his brother. Frank furrowed his brow. "Might be some kind of a code. Let's compare all the word changes and see what we get." They had barely started on this job when the hall telephone rang. Joe took the call. "This is Chief Colleague," said a crisp voice. "Understand you and your brother were at Bivens' novelty shop this afternoon when the owner got robbed." "That's right. In fact, we chased the hold-up men." "Anything to do with the case your father's working on, Joe?" "Could be, sir. We're not sure." "Well, if you're interested, the place was robbed again tonight. Or anyhow, it was broken into and ransacked." "What?" Joe cried out. "Happened just about 20 minutes ago," the chief went on. "A patrolman walking past heard some noises and figured something funny was going on. When he went to investigate, the burglars ducked out the back way." "Thanks for the tip, Chief," Joe said. "Frank and I will go right over there." Frank was equally startled when he heard about the burglary. "I wonder if those men stole the wrong Hugo and came back for another try." "Sure sounds that way," Joe agreed, "but they must have heard Mr. Bivens say it was his last Hugo in stock." The two boys drove through the darkened streets of Bayport to the novelty shop on King Street. The store was ablaze with light, but no squad car stood at the scene. Apparently, the police detectives had already left. But there was a patrolman on guard at the door. The Hardys identified themselves, and Frank added, "Chief Colleague just phoned us the news." "He called me too," said the policeman, and let them enter. Mr. Biven was busy straightening up the store. "Oh, it's you boys," he murmured, glancing up as the door's bell tinkled. Most of the toys, dolls, and scale models had already been neatly replaced on the shelves. Neatly replaced. "Sorry to hear the news, Mr. Biven," Frank said. "Exactly what happened?" The proprietor shrugged and sighed. "Place was ransacked, but nothing taken. Dratted nuisance. The burglars twice in one day. I can't figure it out. Still, I reckon I'm lucky it wasn't any worse." "Mind if we look around for clues?" Frank asked. "Go ahead, but the police have already done so." As the boys poked around the store, Mr. Biven went down behind the counter. A moment later, he stood up. "Now, that's strange," he remarked with a puzzled frown. "Seems as though someone's been fiddling with my sales checks." "Sales checks?" Frank was struck by a sudden fear. "Yes, had them stashed away in order down here. Now they're all messed up." "Any missing?" Mr. Biven scratched his bald head. "Well, now, let's see here. That's mighty hard to say without checking the cash register tape," Frank said urgently. "Never mind the rest. Just look for the one you wrote up for our friend this afternoon. The name was Morton. Chet Morton." Sure, I remember. Let me see." Mr. Biven brought out the sheaf of slips, thumbed through them several times, then looked up in surprise. By jingo, that one's gone. Those burglars must have taken it. That's what I surmised, Frank said. They came back to check out who had purchased the other dummies lately and found out Chet had one. That means Chet's in danger, Joe said grimly, and maybe Iola, and their dad and mother. Turning to Mr. Biven, he asked, "May I use your phone?" "Sure thing." Thoroughly alarmed by now, Joe scooped up the telephone and dialed Chet's number. At the other end of the line, he could hear a steady series of rings, but after a minute, he gave up. "No answer," reported Frank. He reported to Frank, "Come on, let's get out there fast." The boys dashed out of the store, leaped into the convertible, and headed for the Morton farm. Once outside of town, Frank switched on the long-range lights. The twin beams probed the darkness as they sped along. Neither boy spoke, but both were gripped by the same fear. Was the Morton family in trouble? Why had no one answered the phone when Chet had said he would be at home? Presently, the farmhouse loomed up against the night sky. The windows were dark. "I don't like this," Frank said grimly. That is the end of chapter 4. This is the part where I say click the button over there for the next chapter, and also consider subscribing by clicking this button. Thanks a lot, and catch you soon.